it's my pleasure to introduce our very first panel. And the first thing I'm going to say is please bear with us. This is the most complex panel. It's the first one, and we've never done this hybrid. So what I would like to just do is a real quick check-in on our speakers. Alison Watson, I know that you are online. Hello. Omari from Culture Source, are you online? Hello. And Lisa Brisson from Michigan Museums Association, are you there? Okay, I think we are set. On that note, what I would ask is if you're joining us by Zoom, please make sure your mics are muted. If you'd like to turn off your camera, that's fine, unless you're a speaker. And we will open everything up to Q&A after we've had a discussion for a bit. We're going to go back and forth and let us see how it goes. So how about a brief introduction to our wonderful speakers. Lisa Brisson is the Michigan Museums Association Executive Director. MMA has been supporting the work of Michigan Museums for over 60 years, representing art, history, science, military, maritime, and youth museums, as well as aquariums, zoos, botanical gardens, arboretums, historic sites, and science and technology centers. And Lisa's coming to us from Sheboygan. Or not, one or the other. Trey, you just met. And Trey became the 8th president of the Interlochen Center for the Arts in June 2017. He is responsible for advancing the institution as a global leader in arts education and a high-impact, financially sustainable nonprofit, which includes the Interlochen Arts Academy, Interlochen Arts Camp, Interlochen College of Creative Arts, Interlochen Presents, Interlochen Online, and Interlochen Public Radio. Craig Hadley is in the middle, and Craig serves as the Executive Director and Chief Curator of the Dennos Museum Center at Northwestern Michigan College. Prior to his arrival at the Dennos in 2019, he held administrative and curatorial roles at DePaul University and Beloit College, respectively. He is also an active board member of the Association of Academic Museums and Galleries, and serves as guest reviewer for the Institute of Museum and Library Services and the National Endowment for the Humanities. Omari he comes to us from Detroit, and he is with, or Ann Arbor, one or two, and he represents Culture Source in Detroit. He engages the arts as a passion and profession, and in each mode enjoys discovering and deepening impacts. As Executive Director of Culture Source in Detroit, he advances efforts to have creative expression thrive in communities. He has also served as the State of Michigan Council for Arts and Cultural Affairs, now the Michigan Arts and Culture Council. Served terms through 3 governors, 2 of those as the chair. He is now chairing the National Association of State Arts Agencies and serves on the Arts Midwest Board. Esther Triggs is the Associate Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Interlochen Center for the Arts. She co-founded the Journey Theater Project, JTP, which works with nonprofits, corporate entities, educational, religious, and community organizations to create, I should have put those on before, to create a space for necessary conversations. As Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Triggs challenged traditional power structures and disrupted unconscious bias with the use of theater, dialogue, game, and data. She has dedicated her career to educating communities and anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. Her unique experience in both theatrical and corporate settings allows her to bridge gaps in facilitating conversations, which lead to empowerment of individuals and groups toward equitable solutions. Alison Watson. Alison is the Executive Director for the Michigan Arts and Culture Council. MAC serves to encourage, develop, and facilitate an enriched environment of creative and cultural activity in Michigan. The council envisions a Michigan where every citizen celebrates the state's cultural treasures and arts and cultural experiences are accessible to all of its citizens. Alison has numerous years of expertise in Michigan arts and culture, and has held leadership roles at the Michigan Theater Jackson, the Arts and Cultural Alliance in Jackson County, as well as with the SA Michigan, Arts of Michigan, and Michigan Association of Community Arts Agencies. And I would like to just add and recognize that Alison's colleague, Alex Flannery, a former Interlochen staff member, and the new operational support program manager, is with us today, and I invite you to connect with Alex before we leave a little bit after lunchtime today. Okay. Basically, since the pandemic began, we started off the very last summit and this very first panel with a comment that resiliency is the ability to pivot over and over again. And I would say, who knew that the pandemic pivots were going to continue for yet another year? We have been in the trenches for 2.5 years. And yet, the art sector has risen creatively, resiliently, to lead locally, lead regionally, and lead across the nation. However, with that, what we'd love to do is kind of take a pulse. Our look today is everything's changed. Where are we today? Where are we going? What's going to stay? What's going to go back? Now, how are we going to balance it all? We can't do it all, but we can do a lot. So let's have this conversation. And I'd like to start off first with Alison Watson for a brief recap of where we are with the state of Michigan and some of the key things we're looking forward to back and forth. Allie?
Thank you, Mary. I'm nervous. You said brief. I'm never brief. I love to talk. So the 6 pages of notes that I have here.
I know that I have a little bit of leverage to ask you when you are talking to one who studio.
Well, thank you all for being here and letting me be part of the conversation. I am so sorry that I could not end up making it work to travel up to see you all, because you all know I love being in person, and I love the fact that you all take the time out of your day to travel to Interlochen and be there. So I'm very sorry I'm not there, but you get Alex, and I am never giving him up. So nobody think about it. Nobody try to take him back. He's mine, and I'm not going to let him go. But I'm glad that he's there, and be sure to reach out if you don't know Alex to say hi, ask him all the questions that you might have about us and about the work that he's doing, and even some of the work that we're moving into. Because I think sometimes people think about the council, and we sit in Lansing, we talk about budgets, we get money from appropriations to turn around and give it into grants, and that's all we do. I won't lie, that's a big part of what we do. And we will always continue to work towards that and advocate for additional dollars and get them out into communities. But I think if nothing in this 2.5 years time frame that we've learned is that there is so much more that we can be doing in our state, and not only in Lansing with legislators, but for communities around our great state. And so I think it's a critical time for us to be expanding our reach, expanding the ways we engage in communities. And we want to model that behavior just as much as we want to encourage you to do that. I think when it comes to funding, we've been pretty lucky the last few years with the relief dollars that have come in. We've tried our best to get that money grab, right, that's floating around, and to get it back out into communities which I hope I would say was an easy process, that it wasn't too much of a lift to get those additional dollars. And so we're thankful for that. A lot of people have said to me, "Oh, you must feel really good. You haven't lost that many organizations in the last couple of years." There was a lot of concern about closures, permanent closures. And yes, we have been lucky. We haven't lost as many organizations as we thought. But I think about what's going to happen later. What's going to happen in another year or two from now when the relief dollars aren't there, when audiences have changed, when people's perceptions of what arts and culture is and how we engage is different from what we were used to, 3-4 years ago, because all of that is different. But I think there's a lot of opportunities there. I think that in the last couple of years, there's been a stronger appreciation for arts and culture, especially when people were shut down and quarantined and locked down in their homes. There became a different appreciation for the work. There's a different appreciation for what it means to gather again. Now, what that's going to look like in the future is going to be different than what we've ever were used to in the before. I don't think there's ever going back to the way that things were, even though we might want that to happen. It's changed so much, and the way that people are going to want to interact with the programs and services is different. That we're going to have to dig deep and continue to be creative and be innovative in the way that we present programming, the way we think about our programs, the way that we present, who we engage with, what types of program will we do. It's all different now than what it was a couple of years ago. I think there's a need for making sure that voices in our communities, regardless of who they are or where they come from, that there's now a need and a want for all voices to be heard, and that the way that we present them, the way that we honor them, and the way that they engage is all different. It reminds me, so sorry, Mary, I went, little side note story. I attended a symphony event this past weekend. So excited to be back in listening to live music. It was my first time. I was so excited. And I went on thinking, okay, I'm going to see the symphony perform. And it just so happened that the Gilmore Piano Festival was partnering with the symphony to present one of their young awardee winners from a couple of years ago as part of this. But what the real joy of that piece was, of that day was, they brought in a Jackson native who is young. Well, young is relative, right? To me, it seemed young. He's graduated in the late 2000s from high school and is already making his name for himself in the music world as a composer. He brought premiered a first piece called A Hood Fantasy. And the idea was that he said, I grew up in the hood. He goes, we didn't have symphony readily available to us. We didn't have the variety of instruments available to us. But I found that. And the fact now, when he thinks about some of his compositions, is that he wants to bring those sounds and that music that he grew up with into some of the things that he was told that he shouldn't maybe think about or wasn't always a natural avenue for him. And so he then not only looks to premiere these works with the symphonies, but he always makes sure that there is a community center engagement piece so that there's kids that might have an upbringing like him realize that music is a lot bigger world than what they might be accustomed to. And I think the story there is that there's this blending, right, of what are those traditional pieces of arts and culture? In this case, it was a symphony, but how does it blend with the new voices that maybe were sort of invisible to us before, but what's that blending, and how now, that sounds silly, but how do we take those two and provide it to a community that continues to expand our reach, to make sure that arts and culture is part of everyone's lives in a way that is different than what it was before. So couple of key pieces that I would say that for us that we continue to look at is how do we do that within state government? Our focus we always have to come back and think about what can be our partners within state government. And so it's a lot of conversations and it's a lot of work. And we hope that it's a journey and that there'll be some benefits towards the end. But how do we build relationships with economic development in ways that we haven't? Where can we meet them with language that makes sense to them as well as makes sense to us in the creative sector? How do we work and build on work with Veterans Affairs? How do we look at arts and culture in the correction facilities, not just adults, not just youth, but thinking about family bonds and what happens when somebody that you love is incarcerated and those that are on the outside, that there's value on both of those. And so how can we have conversations with Health and Human Services Department as well as corrections to think about those things? Education. Oh boy, man, all of you that do education, not my wheelhouse of work, but let me tell you what, I think there's, this potential of continuing to push the agenda of that arts and culture doesn't have to happen within those four walls of a building, whether it's a school, whether it's a arts and cultural organization, but how can we continue to find and push ways that arts and culture is weaved throughout our communities and that we bring light to it? We think about it in healthcare systems, both those that are patients, those that are caregivers. And one of those things that we're excited to be part of, legislation has been introduced that would certify and regulate art therapy in our state, which you might think, why do we need to have it regulated in our state? Insurance, right? If we can pass that, then private insurance companies would have to pay for art therapy-based services as part of an overall healthcare package for a person. That has huge impacts, not only those that are in hospital facilities, but we think about our veterans, we think about it in our schools. All of that are pieces that could be impacted by this. So for us, we want to think about, yes, money, which we're happy right now. The Senate is looking to give us an increase of up to $15 million. But what are policy pieces? What are conversations that we can have that change, not always just direct dollars into our budget, but continue to move out into other aspects and have long-term impact on our state. So was that brief enough, Mary? Let me stop there.
Oh, actually, it was wonderful. Thank you. But I am going to try to give a few others a chance for a minute. No, thank you. There's a lot of great stuff going on in the state, and we're so thankful for your leadership. And, the synergies that are going on right now in Lansing are great. Omari, you were, actually everybody here has some really unique perspectives. But Omari, coming in from Detroit, and also wearing your national hat, wearing your regional hat. What have you seen, both from NASA, from Arts Midwest, and from Culture Source in Detroit, in terms of projecting ahead?
So again, I'd echo Alison's appreciation of being in this room with you all together, and I feel like I am in the room. This is the name of the game these days, hybrid work. Though I certainly do wish I were in person. Last week, I was actually just in Washington, D.C. for our first in-person meeting of the Board of Directors of the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies. And it was a really great, it was the first meeting since October of 2019, and it was a really great gathering. Nice to be with folks, not just in the actual meeting, but during the coffee breaks and board dinners and unofficial happy hours, all those moments. I would say that from my time with that group, certainly thinking about what's happening in the Midwest with Arts Midwest and my work, in Southeast Michigan, I would echo a lot of what Alison said in terms of things that we're looking at and trying to be mindful of. One being that cliff of the end of federal funding or the kind of ways in which money will run out. And so we're seeing that happening, and we're not seeing any signs that the federal government is making any plans to provide any more resources or any more funding. And so there's a real imperative for us all to use this time that we have over the next 1, 2, 3 years to really dig into practices that strengthen our adaptive capacities. And so exactly what you all are doing today is one of the things that we're seeing happen quite a bit across the country, where new kinds of coalitions are forming in order to really meet the moment. There are advocacy organizations that are forming across the country, and a new Creative States Coalition that will look to kind of reform the way arts advocacy happens around the country. Local arts agencies, people on the ground in communities like you all, are also starting to reform and develop new alliances beyond just Americans for the Arts, but figure out who are other partners so that these networks of resiliency are stronger in the case of another crisis, and certainly in the case of just general and ongoing opportunity. One of the things that is certainly on our minds is how people continue to deal with COVID, which is no longer, at least according to Fauci, no longer a pandemic, but will still create lots of variability in the ways in which we do business. And so, again, that is requiring and seeing as an opportunity lots of communication and swapping of ideas. Also, a real willingness to reimagine the work of an arts organization. We typically in our field think in terms of seasons and calendars that are, in 4-month chunks, if not 12-month chunks. We think about exhibitions that happen just in a gallery or concerts that happen in auditoriums. And what the pandemic is doing across the country is really asking people to reimagine the ways in which people are engaged in creative experiences. What do immersive experiences look like that use digital technologies? What does the unbundling of a season look like in such a way that audience members are able to either kind of choose their own adventure throughout a year, or that there are different kinds of ways that we engage people beyond just the core performance, beyond the core exhibition or unveiling experience, but all of the kind of in-between community building work, movement building work. We're seeing all of that become a lot more important. So those are some of the things that I would say about what we're seeing nationally. I feel really positive about the kind of spirit of the work and the spirit of inclusivity that's happening. Everybody is talking about ways in which we might know who is working in our offices, who is on our boards, who is in our audiences, so that we might make all of our kind of creative spaces even more welcoming and again, even more inclusive. And so I'd encourage you all to continue to push forward and do great work, rely on each other, certainly rely on me as I can be helpful. And I'm also just saying, as a reminder, rely on Alison and Alex. They're really great.
Thank you. Let's bring it up to our live panel because, so, Craig, you have been both in the tournaments, and you also play a role at the national level as well with your association work. So what are you seeing projecting forward?
Yeah, good morning. Good morning. I think all of us, right? I mean, we could have a conversation about this all day. Every one of us could come up here and tell our story about what our organization has gone through in the past couple of years. How have all of us responded in different ways based on staff size, budget, mission, all those things that make our organizations unique. At the Dennos specifically, right? some of the hardest decisions I've had to make in the last 2 years have been knowing when to say no to something. Because we've lost funding, we've lost membership, we've lost staff power, all those things over time have declined, right? Sure, there has been federal support and other types of grants, but again, we can't rely on those things forever. So really what our staff did and what we tried to focus on the last few years is really looking back to our audiences here in Traverse City. How do we, and I think particularly in this region, right, I'm still relatively new to the area, just being here 3 years, but especially at the Dennos, right, we're on the campus, we're near downtown, tourists come, they visit the museum, but they're not necessarily going to be members, right? So how do we think about refocusing and really thinking about the museum and our core mission and our duty to our communities and to our partners up here in Northern Michigan? So I think going forward, right, it's really connected to mission. You know, what are we really doing? How are we avoiding some of that duplication of effort, what others might be doing? What can we offer that's unique, right? And in terms of partnership, where can we start to build some of those unique partnerships, whether it's with arts organizations or outside of that field, right? So that, again, we can create opportunities for audiences that are unique and memorable. But again, I would come back and say, it's really been how do we focus the finite resources that we have in a targeted way, and learning to listen to staff who will say, Craig, we can't do that. We gotta stop doing that because we're not going back. So I've appreciated when staff will say, maybe it's time to cut this thing. Maybe we don't need to do this anymore. So there's been a lot of that type of conversation as well.
Good points. And in fact, Lisa Brisson is going to be leading Making the Hard Decisions breakout later today. And actually, I'm going to pivot over to Lisa quickly because I think that you would dovetail many things that Trent just said for Michigan Museums. Oh, and actually, before I forget, those of you at the table, can we move the microphones just a tiny bit closer so the Zoom folks can hear you when we do talk? Sorry, Lisa.
That's all right. Well, thanks, Mary. It's lovely to be here today. And I do, as Omari and Alison just said, I really wish I could be there in person. I was planning on it, but I have a little bug and I decided not to share it with you. You're welcome. Talking about ongoing disruptions related to the pandemic. I think we've all sort of revisioned what we consider for health activities. So I'm happy to be here on Zoom and I apologize for my throat. I just, as I'm reflecting, excuse me, on what everyone else was saying, I keep feeling like the hard work, we think that we've been doing hard work for 2 years, and we have been, but I kind of feel like it's just starting, right? Because we've been in this storm, and now the storm is over, and we're, well, mostly over, and we're looking around, and we need to like figure out what's out there and what's happening. And that's how I feel about what's happening with our organization and the organizations I work with. I think in some ways, it's really about evaluating relationships. We had relationships with our communities in the before times, and I think some of us felt like we knew what those were and how we served our communities. Some of us were still trying to figure it out. I love the Creating Connections program because I think it really helps arts and cultural organizations better understand our relationships with communities. So that was something that maybe we felt okay about before. And then during, we were just doing whatever we could. And now I think we have to reassess that. So some of those relationships are the same. Some people are thinking about us in the same way that they were 2 to 5 years ago. But I think a lot has developed as well. There are things that we at Michigan Museums Association did during the pandemic that I'm still hearing about today, that people suddenly have a new relationship with me that I didn't really think was that big of a deal. So I need to listen to them and I need to talk to them and hear more about them. So I guess what I'm suggesting is that we have an opportunity now to really, reconsider our relationships and reconsider the roles that we play in our communities. And there are opportunities that have been presented to us that we maybe aren't aware of, and we need to find out what those are. And then there are other opportunities that that were there before, but maybe we have to do it in a little different way. And that feels hard to me because it's a lot of work and it's hard to connect and have relationships. But at the same time, wow, what a great opportunity that we have to be important to people. We are important to people. All of what we do here, everyone in this room, everyone on the Zoom, like we do work that really has meaning to a lot of people. And it has meaning in a way that's sort of deep within us, which is hard sometimes to articulate. It's hard to put it into data. And for some of us, maybe for most of us, it's not something that maybe the general population is always able to articulate that value as well. And sometimes they even dismiss it. And so we do hard things all the time, but I think we have some hard things that we have to keep doing now for a little while until we sort of settle into what's happening. So that's my thoughts for now.
Thank you, Lisa. Esther, when we met last year, you were not living in the mitten. So you also bring a very unique perspective to your new role here at Interlochen and for the entire center. So how does your crystal ball look forward and back?
Well, I do have so I don't know if this is on. Is this on?
No, if you slide the switch up.
I got a slide switch.
Thank you.
That was,
That would explain my problem.
yeah. Oh, good. Oh, there we go. My goodness. Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me here today, and thank you to Trey for allowing me to do anything I want to do on campus here. And now that I've said it, it has to come true. I am just thrilled to be able to be in community in person with all of you, as well as being with folks on Zoom. I think this is the new future. When I think about where we were prior to the pandemic, where we are today, and I do appreciate this notion that there is more hard work to be done, but I'm excited. I'm excited by organizations. If you don't know, I moved here from Brooklyn in June last year, and I worked with different partner organizations in New York who specifically worked with one organization was the Creative Arts Team in association with CUNY University, and they worked with students. It was a nonprofit. Any student could join. It was all free, and they created pieces of theater from the students, and each year there's a different theme. And each of these pieces of theater had a message. They had an overarching message, and they also had a message of interesting things that the students cared about, whether it was about life, or death, or race, or fitting in, or even getting your first period. It's students, and it's what they wanted to talk about. And these beautiful productions were done in person, traditionally as we would see theater. And of course the pandemic hit, and of course their pockets were hit, and people didn't want to give money to a show that they weren't going to be able to go and see in person. And so what did they do? We've already been talking about it. They did. And they did it again. And they did online classes for folks like myself and other educators and other artists to show them how to hit it. And I think that goes back to what Trey says, is that we are stronger together, that we are here to be able to share resources with each other. We care about the work we're doing because we know it matters. It is the most important thing that we can do, is to give art and beauty to the world. That, yeah, go ahead. You don't have to applaud me. It's the truth, right? So if we're in working in division, then we are not going to actually give art and beauty to the world. So I love that we're all here today. My crystal ball says we will never go back, because now we are more accessible. Now kids in those places that might not have had access to opera get to see the Metropolitan Opera, right? We're showing our music, our art, our theater, our beauty to anyone. And that goes back to why it is so important that we are also learning from each other and opening up our own perspective of what it should look like and what changes we need to be able to shift and move into to see the larger, more beautiful picture, which encompasses everyone, no matter where someone is coming from. So my crystal ball sees a very beautiful future, and it's not just because I'm an optimist. Well, maybe it is, but it's also because I know that time and time again, art, music, theater, we always have a rebirth over and over and over again, and we always get stronger. So if you're focusing on spreading that beauty, spreading that art, you're focusing, in my perspective, because I do DEI, right? Building communities, bringing people together, having challenging conversations through your art, through your music, through your theater, then that is going to reshape the culture of our whole entire country and also potentially our world. So I appreciate being here. I hope that explains what's going to happen next. And you should have been taking notes. That was very detailed on what's happening next.
I was taking notes.
Oh, boy.
I had a couple of great quotes that'll probably show up on recapping this online. And because you said it, and doesn't it write it? Of course it's gonna happen. It is carved in stone. So, Trey, would you like to add on? You started us off talking about Interlochen, please. Continue.
Well, first of all, Esther can do whatever she wants, and she has been doing whatever she wants, and it's only making it stronger and better. I want to pick up on a theme that Esther noted, which is this idea of rebirth. Having been in a leadership role through the .com, through the housing bust, through this experience that we're going through right now, we have lived through those moments and seen that we've come out of those on the other side with a different perspective, and richer for the experience, more resilient from the challenges that we face during those particular moments. At the same time, this is very different than anything that we've experienced because it's struck at the core of how we connect with our communities, how we connect with those that we serve. So I'll be fairly brief, but I'll share like two things that I think we need to hold simultaneously right now. One is what is different about this particular challenging moment than past challenging moments that are unique. So I'll underline, for example, the point that Omari made, which is there's a certain amount of support that's coming into our sector right now that is going to be, I would agree, short-lived. So what do we do with that to, as Omari said, build capacity right now to think differently about how we operate while we've got this window where some support might be available. So we need to hold at, the very real challenges that exist right now, but not forget about the vision that we have for our institutions. Okay, we'll keep this going. So not forget about the vision that we have for our institutions because it's so.
Maybe Esther,
My mic's on. So do you want to switch next, Trey? Try my mic.
Also, the Zoom mic isn't open, is it? Well, no, it's open. It's not.
Let's try that.
There we go. So keeping in view the vision that we've got for our institutions, because it's really easy to get hung up on the here and now and what do we do to get to tomorrow and to next week, but not lose sight of where are we going, what are we ultimately trying to achieve, and a lot of time that think time gets lost in our institutions where we're not kind of imagining, precisely where we're going. And at a time where, the scrap that goes on for limited resources, we've got to be really clear about our messaging. So what makes this my institution deserving of support that's going to make a difference in the world, so that we've got that, those couple of points like really firmly embedded, so that we're communicating those with all of our supporters and they're communicating that same message. So again, holding on to what is it unique and different about this particular moment, and at the same time, where are we going? And then, the rest sort of gets filled in once we've got those two things in place, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry about the mic problem. What I'd like to do is, perhaps, I actually have a series of questions. You all answered them all in your individual talks. So this is what I'd like to open everything up to our group. But beforehand, you have questions for each other that based on what I just said, or questions for us. That we should be thinking about. And otherwise, shall we take, I'm gonna take the microphone that was a little goofy and take that away. And then we're going to hand it off to something else. Okay. Ian, are you monitoring the chat? So what I would ask is, as you can remind, those of you on Zoom, go ahead and if you can raise your hands or post questions in chat. We'll also try to log you in. We want to make this as interactive as possible, but at the same time, we don't want people kind of jumping on top of each other either. So what I would ask is, would anybody like to, we have questions from the audience? And I can start with Brett because he's close, and then we'll pass on the microphone.
Good.
So looking at kind of the way that human bodies work and this concept of pandemic, after humans go through this long period of stress, those first moments when the stress is receded, the deadline is passed, is always when that immune system just kind of crashes and then you sit in your bed for next week. Using that kind of as a metaphor or analogy for society was we're coming out of COVID. Our communities and regions are going to be taking that deep breath, be looking for their ways of doing self-care and healing as their metaphorical immune system crashes. It makes sense that their first steps that they're going to look at to build their own water bodies will be the arts and culture industries and groups that are in our regions and communities. But on the flip side of that, how would you imagine or predict or advise arts and culture groups to do their own breathing and self-care and pivoting so that post-pandemic burnout is staved off a little bit as probably even more weight will be put onto arts and culture larger communities that are seeking interpersonal connection and engagements.
Anybody like to get that one? On the stage?
Sure. This is Omari. I would say it is a bit of a tricky moment where just at the time where a lot of audiences are ready to resume some of their activities that they were doing pre-pandemic is the time where our peers and colleagues are feeling as burned out as ever. And so there are two things that we're sensing in our work really need to happen. One, we have to really make sure that we're, I'm thinking partly about what Esther said, make sure that as we are doing our work, we are continuing to evolve it and make sure that it really meets people where they're at and recognizes the wide range of ways that people's tastes, their preferences have changed. More people have been forced to increase their digital capacity in such a way that now, digital experiences aren't so scary. They're they're not so foreign anymore. And so if on this other side, if we are thinking about doing the things the same way and just kind of restarting past programs, we likely will be disappointed by the engagement, and at the same time, one of the things that we're doing, at least in our own office, is really proactively investing in helping our team members attend to their own well-being. There's only so much that I can do as the director in terms of helping people with that, but I just want to give people the tools to do that. So our staff team meets monthly with a wellness coach, Dr. AJ, who just helps people become more aware of their own well-being and strategies to attend to it as a result of that awareness. We work with occasionally a productivity coach, Donna Lindley at Spark Productivity, that just helps us understand the ways in which we can be better about using our time during the day, not trying to be efficient, but just understanding the traps that we can easily fall into when we're doing a lot of multitasking, or when we are, doing kind of moving through tasks in these loops and not kind of spinning out productive time, what it means to have allies in helping you be productive. So we're working with that kind of person. We also have engaged this equity firm in the Twin Cities, Team Dynamics, to be equity strategists in residence with us, and certainly for our members. And in particular, beyond any kind of basic strategy, beyond any kind of things that they teach us about how to have an always more inclusive workspace, performance spaces, exhibition spaces, all that, they are helping our staff team be thoughtful about how hard the work is of dealing with equity, diversity, and inclusion, having tough conversations about identity in the workplace, really challenging ways of working that are so ingrained, but that must change. That's really tough stuff. And so we work with that coach to really help us process what that means, and frankly, to help staff members understand if they are in fact too tender, too harmed, too sensitive to do this work. Because at the end of the day, what we're doing is, it's not like frontline work of being a nurse in a hospital, but it is work that is very much about service. It is work that is very much about people. And at its best, it's about building communities. And that takes a lot of kind of emotional bandwidth, mental bandwidth. And so we're finding that we're having to, again, make proactive investments in helping our staff kind of navigate the intensity of that work, so that at this moment where people are ready to kind of get back to it, we are ready for them.
Thank you. Could anybody or else like to say something? That's it.
I'll just say one. Yeah, the only piece that I would add to this, which I think Omari gets really to the core of the softer elements. And I would just add that the leadership challenge, I think, is to kind of what Craig said earlier, less is sometimes more. So what do we say no to? Strategy, often people think it's not saying yes to things, but it's really about what do we decide not to do. And also it's, going through moments like this, it's just, in a past world where we were more normal, you could maybe take on some projects that weren't as impactful. And I think the leadership challenge is like, what's the most impactful thing that we can do, and try and focus on that. And I'll admit that I'm not very good at this, but it's particularly important right now. So from the goal setting process this year, we sort of trimmed back from a much larger number of goals in the past to a more contained number to try and get to this issue. So,
Ian, do we have Anybody online or on Zoom?
We have lots on, but no questions at the moment.
Okay, Tom, you have a question?
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Tom Mayer, and I'm going to direct this question to Interlochen. There were months where you restricted access on the campus, and I'd like to hear some of the bright moments, a couple of them maybe, where things worked out really well, and it's something that you found novel or unique that was good, like real good. Two things, and Esther, please jump in on this. The two things immediately come to mind. The most important goal that we were trying to achieve was to maintain in-person instruction. So that's the reason that we basically closed off this campus so that we could make sure that our community was following the strictest set of guidelines so that we could keep instruction going. And so we're grateful that for the most part, and it's been a journey that's happened. The point that I would cite, and Esther mentioned this a little bit earlier, is the online access and energy to performances just escalated. Our production value got to a new level. There were so many great, aspects to that will carry on. We are in a different situation other than what we do in the summer, is that we're not a ticket reliant institution for the most part. And so that means that we don't have the trade-offs that a professional performing arts institution necessarily would have. But I would cite that as a big sort of win, and not unique to other institutions here, I'm sure.
I'm not so sure I have so much more to add. I think I entered into the space virtually, actually. So the greatest thing that happened was me getting this job to come here. Because I was still in New York finishing up other projects when I began working here in April, was able to do that through Zoom, and that would absolutely not have happened if we were in a non-COVID world, right? No organization in the past, and if we even think about wellness of people, right? No organization in the past would say, sure, you can start with us from the comfort of your Brooklyn home until you can transition at the end of the school year. We'll do Zoom meetings. Zoom, kind of, or Google Meet, or whatever you use, those platforms have opened things up, and as Trey mentioned, folks having to pivot into much more web-based content. I know that I've heard from my students and their parents how appreciative they were about all the web-based content we were putting up on our website because we wanted our parents to be able to see their students perform. So that was amazing. And then the fact that, especially coming from New York, that Interlochen was so thoughtful in being able to, yes, it was hard to not allow the outside community to come in, but understanding what is the most important thing that we're trying to do here, and that is to try to create culture changers of the future. We're supporting these students, these art students, theater students, music students, creative writers who are going to go out and change the world for better. I always like it, some people say, oh, we want to change the world. Well, we don't want to just change the world, we want to change it for better. So we're creating creative artists that can go out and have that global perspective and that cultural perspective and make real changes. So for me, from an outside perspective, I was very excited to join this community just from that thoughtfulness and how they were taking care of their students, which are the most important.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yeah. And Tom, can you use this microphone back?
On that note, of trying to change the world, I'm a retired high school art teacher, and the after finally getting the textbook, many of the lessons were focused on controversy, equality, statements, visual statements made by artists, which we discussed at length in my classes and developed projects around. And as I look at the state of the arts today and the fact that they're censoring math books, I can't help but think that soon down the road, the arts, in addressing the many issues that we have today and trying to create a better world, could very easily find themselves in the position of being censored. I mean, right now they're pulling down statues in Europe of Lenin and so on, which is easy to say, yeah, go for it, but at what point do we look at censorship for students and professional artists, or funding those projects? Having the ability to have a discussion and dialogue on those difficult issues seems to be becoming more dangerous on a regular basis. And in what role are we going to find the arts? Are we just going to, erase history, or are we going to find a way that we're going to get the support for the freedom on a state as well as a national, even international level?
I would love to take a stab at this one. We could talk about curatorial freedom and academic freedom all day in this session. Both the College Art Association and then the Association of Academic Museums and Galleries on that board, both of us in the past few years have released statements and resources for curators and for our faculty and museum professionals to really develop a framework that takes a hard stand on academic freedom. Case in point, right? I'm connected to an academic institution. We have a very, very clear line between what is the Dennos Museum Center doing, who is empowered to make decisions about exhibition content and what gets mounted, and who doesn't, right? And so these are not, for example, board level decisions that are taking place, right? Staff is empowered, I am empowered to make those decisions on behalf of the museum. But there are a lot of institutions, right, where there may be a gray line, right? Especially with museum programs, performing arts programs that are embedded within departments that aren't necessarily freestanding organizations, right? So that's where it gets really complicated. An art department within a high school, within a larger curriculum, right? That's where sort of delineating that responsibility gets, I think, much trickier. But it is a serious issue in the field, and there's a lot of debate right now, but I would encourage all of you to jump on CAA's website, for example, and take a look at some of their content that they've produced. Because again, there is so much fear, I think, at this point in time about whether or not we can do our jobs. At what point do we do something that sort of crosses a line where now I have to make the decision between standing up for an exhibition or an artist, or losing my job, right? And so those are decisions that I think all of us within the arts have to be sort of tuned into.
Thank you, Craig. Anybody online? Alien or from the movie?
I would love to jump in on this conversation. I think one thing we have to remember is that this is a journey that we're on. It's a journey of understanding who everyone is in this world. I'm reminded of, I was lucky enough to attend an event with Michelle Obama when she, as part of the launch of her book. And one of the pieces that stuck with me when she spoke about her book was, you can't hate somebody up close, right? And I really love that. And why that stuck with me is because I feel that arts and culture has that ability to frame not new voices, different voices than what we've always heard in the past, that it can frame new voices, and the fact that you can use arts and culture, regardless of the art form, as a way of cultural diplomacy, of understanding people that don't look like you, that don't have the same thoughts as you, that don't practice the same, perhaps, religion, lifestyles, whatever it might be. And arts and culture can have a very impactful way of learning about somebody who is different from you, a community that is different from you. And when you start on a local level of one, perhaps understanding who is part of your community, who actually are the members of your community, that you can begin to have ripple effects of, well, what's in the next community? What's in the next state? What's in the next country? And using arts and culture as that form to maybe it doesn't start out as those hard conversations, but maybe it starts off as locally sharing your stories, locally bringing people together in ways that we haven't before, to then continue to build and build and build. It's tough work. Omari and I have had conversations about this way too many times, maybe, or maybe it's not enough, right? But it's the conversation and reminding ourselves that it's a journey, that we always don't steer the ship in the right direction, and that we might run aground for a little bit, but you don't stop the journey just because you maybe hit a roadblock of understanding, that you are open and honest, that we're all on a journey together of new discovery, of new voices. I mean, we were talking with the Library Association, and this year so far, they have had a record number of books on the list to be banned. Compared to a couple of years ago that they maybe had 20, that now there's several hundred books that people are fighting to ban. Why? Maybe because it's a different value set, it's a different belief system than ours. But when you take the time to start learning who your neighbors are, and then learning and expanding that front porch of yours to the next community, to the next person, I think it's a journey to change what our perceptions are, and a way to bring people together.
Thank you. Are there any, I'm taking a look at the time and want to be, for being the most time challenged person, literally on this entire campus right now. I am trying very hard to at least kind of keep us within a little bit of the window. Just want to thank our speakers. Are there any final comments that anybody would like to add in? I'm just so thankful that you're here, that you've shared your insights. I wish we could continue this conversation all morning long, honestly.
Yeah, and I am also looking at the time and trying to be aware, but I would be remiss if I didn't thank everyone for their words and their thoughtfulness, as well as speak to this last conversation piece, that we are all on a journey. And that if we are trusting each other's experience as being their experience, right? My experience is my experience. And if you trust that my experience is my experience, then we can begin to have those conversations. And I think that's what you were talking about, of sharing stories, of getting to know your neighbor. It begins with education. We need to educate ourselves, we need to research, learn about other people, not just in our community, but in the world. And then also it's about transparency. How are we being transparent with the work that we are doing, with our own lives? How are we allowing ourselves to be vulnerable? How are we allowing ourselves to sit in the discomfort of having these necessary conversations, these challenging conversations? And I'll leave you on this, because this is the most important part, is I often tell people that I want you to lean into that discomfort. Because if my daughter comes to me and she has a splinter or a sliver in her hand and she says, "Mom, I need you to take it out," and I say, "Okay, I'll take it out," she says, "Is it gonna hurt?" And I say, "Yes, it's gonna hurt." And she'll say, "No, please don't take it out." Well, what happens if we don't take it out? It festers, it grows, it doesn't heal. You need to lean into the discomfort, even if it is uncomfortable. Lean into it for a moment, if for no other reason that we can begin the journey together to heal. And of course, I also tell her I might have to cut off her hand, but that's a different story. So, I hope that we are going to together continue this journey. Arts have always been censored, and we will continue to be so, but if we are thinking back to what is our most important reason for doing what we're doing, and we're holding true to that, who cares? Come get a job at Interlochen.
So Mary, if I could just jump in for 1 second as well. I know we have to move on. I wanted to just present an opportunity to this group that we all have to join together on a state level to talk about these things and to advocate for each other. So I'm part of the Cultural Advocacy Network of Michigan, and we're a very new organization that really just started to form before the pandemic set in. So we've kind of been moving forward for 2 years, but we're sort of in a new stage of life. We just hired a director, a staff position, and we're sort of revisiting all of our activities and our focus. And I just want to encourage you to get to know us, the Cultural Advocacy Network of Michigan. It's arts and culture organizations that come together to advocate for our communities and our work in the state of Michigan. We do a lot to support the Michigan Arts and Culture Council, and we're actively making phone calls and having chats right now to help make sure that budget gets through all the way. But there's also lots of conversations about what things that we can be doing for advocating for the arts and culture communities. Currently, we have a couple of membership opportunities. We have some for statewide organizations, and we have some for individuals. And hopefully in the next couple of months, we'll have some for regional organizations like this. So you can find more about it at www.canmichigan.org. And I'm putting the link in the chat for those of us on Zoom. But feel free to follow up with me individually as well. You can sign up for our quarterly newsletter if you just want to kind of get on the radar. So thanks for the minute for that plug, Mary.
Thank you for that, Lisa. I've actually been honored to join the program committee with Lisa on beforehand. We will follow up our day today, sending out tools and links. Also, we're putting out a newsletter every other week, sometimes every week. We will continue to have information about CAN as well as all the other opportunities, also art, any other things that you all share with me. But yes, it's a great organization. Did lead the Michigan Legislative Advocacy Day that several folks here participated in. So thank you for that plug. Thank you for all being here. We are going to take a 5-minute break. So restrooms are just down the hall and to the left. If you are on Zoom, you are welcome to stay. You're welcome to share it with each other if you'd like to. Zoom network. But we'll come back here. We will have a different link until after lunchtime. So if you're on Zoom, stay there. And thank you all.